Hello, my name is Austin Habish, the founder of Think Catholic, and you're listening to the Summa podcast, where we study St. Thomas Aquinas' Summa Theologiae in a way simple and insightful for anyone to understand. The Summa podcast is brought to you by Think Catholic. Taking two questions of the Summa a day, we'll seek to summarize St. Thomas's responses, discovering the brilliance of Aquinas and his Catholic faith is day 173. So let's get started. We're covering today questions 110 and 111 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of the vices opposed to truth, and first of lying, and of dissimulation and hypocrisy. The translation that I always use in these podcasts is the one generously provided to me by Ave Maria Press, the 5-volume set translated by the Fathers of the English Dominican province, which you can now get at a discounted price from Ave Maria Press's site by typing in the code Summa 10, and so here we go. Article 1, whether lying is always opposed to truth. Just like a man worshiping is not necessarily exercising the virtue of religion, unless his worship is directed towards the one true God and in the manner God has appointed, so too if a man tells a falsehood, it is not necessarily lying, unless he know that what he is saying is false, and with the intention of deceiving another. The essence of lying lies in the intentional disconformity between what one knows and what one says or indicates by any other sign, like a text message or physical gesture. It is this lack of equality between what we know and what we say which pertains precisely to injustice. And this is always opposed to the virtue of truthfulness. Aquinas gives us the three requisite components of a lie in the following words. If these three things concur, namely falsehood of what is said, the will to tell a falsehood, and finally the intention to deceive, then there is falsehood, materially, since what was said is false, formally, on account of the will to tell an untruth, and effectively, on account of the will to impart a falsehood. Article 2, whether lies are sufficiently divided into officious, jocose, and mischievous lies. Remember again that a lie is an intentional disformity between what we know and what we then signify or reveal with our words and deeds. And this is wrong because the purpose of these signs, whether they be written or spoken or gestured, is precisely for the sake of being able to reveal what we know to another. The nature of these things, why they exist, is for the sake of transmitting truth. And just like it is wrong to eat rocks because that thwarts the nature, the reason for the existence of our digestive system specifically, so too it is wrong to thwart the purpose of these external signs by using them to signify that which isn't true. And within these lies there is a threefold division. Some lies are spoken for the sake of gaining some advantage. These are officious lies. Other lies are spoken for the sake of pleasure. These are called jocose lies. Lastly, there are lies spoken for the sake of harming others, and these are called mischievous lies. Article 3, whether every lie is a sin. Lying is always wrong for the same reason adultery is always wrong, and that both are evil according to the kind of act that they are, as acts contrary to the nature of man, and therefore at the same time contrary to the intention of the Creator who gave us such a nature. And just as there is never a right time, way, person, or reason to commit adultery, there is no reason we could make lying, which is an evil in itself, no longer an evil act. Allowing St. Thomas to speak for himself, he tells us, an action that is naturally evil in respect of its genus or kind can by no means be good and lawful. Now a lie is evil in the respect of its genus, since it's an action bearing on undue matter. For as words are naturally signs of intellectual acts, it is unnatural and undue for anyone to signify by words something that is not in his mind. Article 4, whether every lie is a mortal sin. If a lie is contrary to charity, directly opposed to love of God and neighbor, then it is mortally sinful. For example, from the perspective of the contents of a lie, if it is a falsehood regarding God or divine worship, this would be mortally sinful because of its matter, and if it regarded human conduct and giving man a false ethics, this would also be mortally sinful, and for the same reason. Then from the aspect of the intention, even if a man's lie is seemingly less grievous in its contents, like lying about who won the baseball game, but it come out of an intention of hatred of one's neighbor or hatred of God, then as being opposed to charity, this too would make the lie mortally sinful. However, in the case of the jocose or officious lies, in which one might have been trying to do good to their neighbor, albeit in a misguided way, by some lie, then the intention and the matter of this lie may, in fact, be only venially sinful. As St. Thomas tells us, if the false opinion engendered by the lie be about some matter the knowledge of which is of no consequence, wherefore a lie of this kind considered in itself is not a mortal sin, and if the end intended be not contrary to charity, neither will the lie considered under this aspect be a mortal sin, as in the case of a jocose lie where some little pleasure is intended, or of an officious lie where the good also of one's neighbor is intended. But as a final note, which I believe is worth mentioning, not even a venial sin should be done voluntarily for the sake of some perceived good, as St. Paul mentioned in the letter to the Romans. And why not do evil that good may come, as some people slanderously charge us with saying their condemnation is just. And as St. John Henry Newman wrote, the Catholic Church holds it better for the sun and moon to drop from heaven, for the earth to fail, and for all of the many millions on it to die of starvation in extremest agony, as far as temporal affliction goes, than that one soul, I will not say should be lost, but should commit one single venial sin, should tell one willful untruth, or should steal one poor farthing without excuse. Now on to question 111 of dissimulation and hypocrisy. Article 1, whether all dissimulation is a sin. I think the easiest word to equate with dissimulation, since we rarely use that word here, which is used quite frequently within this article, is pretending. And we have been saying we can intentionally deceive our neighbor not only with our words, spoken or written, but also with our deeds and gestures. Imagine pretending to be another's friend when you are actually the whole time seeking to ruin them. This is a kind of deception. And I think all of us would understand that at an intellectual level, but even maybe more so at a gut level, an instinctual level. But what about when Scripture says in the Gospel of Luke that as the disciples drew near to the village to which they were going, Jesus pretended to be going further? And although sometimes instead of pretended, the Greek here is translated appeared in English, let us for argument's sake here suppose pretend is the better translation. In response, St. Thomas argues, quoting Augustine, that to pretend is not always a lie, but only when the pretense has no signification. Then it is a lie. So if Jesus pretended to be going farther on so as to symbolize or teach something, then this is instruction by symbol or by example. This is not lying. And this is in fact how Gregory the Great and Augustine understand this moment in the Gospel of Luke. As Aquinas wrote, in this way our Lord pretended he would go farther because he acted as if wishing to go farther in order to signify something figuratively, either because he was far from their faith, according to Gregory, or as Augustine says, because as he was about to go farther away from them by ascending into heaven, he was, so to speak, held back on earth by their hospitality. So in response to our article, dissimulation or pretending is a sin by being a form of lying, but not all kinds of pretending are lies. Article 2, whether hypocrisy is the same as dissimulation. This article is answered briefly by St. Thomas. So quoting him, he writes, hypocrisy is dissimulation, not, however, any form of dissimulation, but only when one person simulates another, as when a sinner simulates the person of a just man. Augustine says that just as hypocrites by simulating other persons act the parts of those they are not, since he that acts the part of Agamemnon is not that man himself, but pretends to be, so too in the church and in every department of human life. Whoever wishes to seem what he is not is a hypocrite, for he pretends to be just without being so in reality. Article 3, whether hypocrisy is contrary to the virtue of truth. Since dissimulation is contrary to the virtue of truth, and hypocrisy is a kind of dissimulation, then it is also contrary to the virtue of truth. But I would like to point out here that although all of us are sinners, and not nearly as just or righteous as we ought to be, attempting to act rightly and justly is not hypocrisy, not only because we are commanded by God to act justly and righteously before others, but also because the intention of the hypocrite is not to be actually good, or possess virtue, but only to secure some other good by pretending to be virtuous. And this is a big difference, as captured by St. Thomas. The hypocrite in simulating a virtue regards it as his end, not in respect of its existence, as though he wished to have it, but in respect of appearance, since he wishes to seem to have it. Hence, hypocrisy is opposed to truth, inasmuch as he wishes to deceive men with regard to that virtue, and he performs acts of that virtue not as intending them for their own sake, but instrumentally as signs of that virtue. Article 4 in our last article, whether hypocrisy is always a mortal sin. As it is written in Job chapter 13, no hypocrite shall come before his presence. Thus there must be a way in which hypocrisy is a mortal sin, since it can exclude a man from the presence of God. And because Aquinas lays out how this is the case very plainly, we will simply quote him. He writes, "This will depend on the end in view. For if this be contrary to the love of God or of his neighbor, it will be a mortal sin. For instance, if you were to simulate holiness in order to disseminate false doctrine, or that he may obtain ecclesiastical preferment, though unworthy, or that he may obtain any temporal good in which he fixes his end, if, however, the end intended be not contrary to charity, it will be a venial sin, as, for instance, when a man takes pleasure in the pretense itself. Of such a man it is said in Aristotle's Ethics that he would seem to be vain rather than evil. For the same applies to simulation as to a lie." We have just finished covering questions 110 and 111 of the Secunda Secundae, that is, of the vices opposed to truth, and first of lying, and of dissimulation and hypocrisy. My name is Austin Habish with Think Catholic, and I cannot wait to see you tomorrow.